The name of the talk is Looking Toward the Event Horizon. And we will actually try and cross a cognitive event horizon in 1 hour. We're going to cover a lot of material. And if you stay with me for that hour, you're going to come away with I think, a different view of what it means to look at the human future of both the collective in terms of an eschaton or a quantum evolutionary shift for the species, and for you as an individual, because we all face a guaranteed event horizon called death. And the singularity archetype relates to both the endpoint of a species and the endpoint of the individual as a physically incarnated being. It's both, in both cases, it suggests an evolutionary transformation. So, but in order to get through all that and to really be able to internalize it, it's going to take a lot of attention. If you're kind of half in, half out, you're probably better off leaving now because you may get lost. Okay? So my work on this subject began in 1978. My formal work, writing a paper in my last year of college, and we're going to have to talk over the music a little bit. Hopefully it'll be cool enough music to be a great background for this. And I began in 1978. I was a senior in college, 20 years old, and I wrote a paper called Archetypes of the New Evolution. But the source of that paper was stuff that happened when I was a child, where I had a lot of paranormal experiences, and one event in particular that I'll mention just because it's kind of a good transition one is, I wrote an essay, and it's also a podcast on my website called The Path of the Numinous. It's about a path of following the creative muse. You find things that are numinous, that light up with an uncanny significance in your environment, and then follow them down the rabbit hole. And so some of those numinous things in my life included those life-changing, paranormal, and life-threatening paranormal experiences as a child. But then one of them was just watching a black and white movie on a black and white television in like 1969 with my dad in full daylight called Village of the Damned. It's a 1960 British science fiction movie that involves UFOs that turn around the planet. People fall asleep. When they wake up, all the women are pregnant. Their pregnancies quickly come to term. They give birth to these strange children with golden eyes who form a telepathic network. And when I watched this movie, it was like an electric shock I could feel throughout my entire body. It was an ontological shock. I knew this was somehow related to my life's work and to something of the deepest possible significance. It'd be like a religious experience. So what exactly does it mean? So this is going to be challenging, but okay. What exactly is I'm trying to talk? What can it possibly mean? Well, when I was 20 and started to try to look into what these experiences have in common, what the underlying pattern was, my mom, who was a psychologist, said, we should look into Carl Jung and his idea of the archetypes. And so I went up to the second floor of the college library. Here are these impressive black volumes of Princeton Bowling in addition to the works of Jung. But I'm kind of looking at them skeptically. Here's this guy who reached manhood in the 19th century, a dead Swiss guy. What's he going to tell this weird Jewish kid from the Bronx about his strange sci-fi obsessions? But I'm like, I'll give it a shot. I look at the index volume. I say, wow, you wrote a book called Flying Saucers, a modern myth of things seen in the sky. Well, that was a direct hit because all of these numinous mythological versions, I had seen all of the teams involved UFOs, and I was found them fascinating as well. And so I started looking through that book, and I see at the end, it's like he wrote the book near the end of his life, and at the end of it is his epilogue, and then there is like a supplement after the epilogue. It's like he couldn't let go of the subject, and then after the second log, there's the first supplement, there's another supplement. Well, in that last supplement, Jung analyzes a science fiction novel called The Midwich Cuckoos. Well, I just happen to know that The Midwich Cuckoos was the novel the movie Village of the Damned was based on. So here, Jung, almost like a hologram of a wizard bearing a torch, seemed to step out of the bookshelf and say, yeah, I was interested in that one too. And here's what I thought, which had a lot of parallels to where I was kind of going with it. And so I was able to stand on the shoulders of this giant figure who had done the heavy lifting of understanding how archetypes work and how the collective unconscious works, and sort of pick up where he left off. And he left off only because he was going to die soon. And so Anyway, here's the present book, and it's called Looking Toward the Event Horizon. And so what exactly is an event horizon, and what does it mean to cross an event horizon? Well, when you cross an event horizon, you're stepping across a magic doorway, a threshold. I mean, this happens when, for example, you take in entheogen. It happens every night when you go to sleep. And the physics of the waking time suddenly shift, and now you're in the physics of the dream time. That's an event horizon. When we're born is an event horizon. When you die is an event horizon. And when you cross an event horizon, it's a rupture of plane experience. Okay, many core attributes of what it means to be you change. And those things include things like time, sex, gender, body, ego, money, territory, nation state. So it is a profound ontological shock to cross an event horizon. And the Singularity Archetype is a kind of map from the collective unconscious about that event horizon. And the event horizon has two aspects, because it's kind of like a fractal. The small part recapitulates the whole. Well, the small part is the individual, and the individual's life cycle. And the large part is the life cycle of the species. And those parallel. So what eschaton is to the species, the end of the species, and the average lifespan of the species is only 100,000 years. From a million species, it's a million years. Of course, we're the species that's helping to lower the average. And so it definitely runs out at some point, or ends, or goes through a quantum transformation of some sort. And similarly, in probably less than 100 years, so will most of us. And this event horizon is something that we look anxiously toward in a lot of ways. People look toward, what's going to happen when they die. People know what's going to happen in the future of the species. Well, one of the most unreliable of human enterprises, even more unreliable than dieting and romance, is prophecy. Prophecy is something that human beings keep coming back to, and yet we really suck at it. And especially apocalypticists. They've all been disconfirmed so far. That's a 100% failure rate. I mean, what human endeavor continues with a 100% failure rate, and yet it still keeps happening. And if we have time, I'm going to talk about the psychology of apocalypticism, which is really about the dark side of the Singularity Archetype, because any archetype can inspire, but it can also possess. It can pathologize. Okay? So one of the pathologies that can happen when it pathologizes is you become an apocalypticist. That's an example of archetype possession, and you misunderstand an archetype. Okay? But there's actually one group that has somewhat of a successful, just think for a minute, what would that be, that has somewhat of a successful relationship to prophecy? Well, it's definitely not religious. Okay? It's writers, science fiction writers, and sometimes artists. Like my friend Alex Gray painted a painting, you can see it in his book Sacred Mirrors, called Gaia. And there are two, he paints the World Trade Towers, and there are two planes heading toward them. Wow. And there are amazing examples. I have a whole chapter of them in my book from science fiction, and I won't go through them all here, but I think because science fiction writers don't take themselves as serious as religionists, and are imaginative and have access to the collective unconscious, this is the way that the Singularity Archetype and sometimes prophetic ideas can emerge. Okay, so that's a good one for Burning Man, because out here we have all this art and imagination, but we don't take it too seriously. And that's important for loosening things up. We're not dogmatists out here, I don't think. Okay? So when we try and look toward the event horizon of the species, then it's kind of overwhelmingly complex and has such a high failure rate. Because we're going to try and come up with what would be a successful way to look toward the future of the species. Well, I said that the single individual and the species parallel each other. So if the species is an intimidating cauldron of boiling variables that the mind, the sensible mind cringes from trying to predict, as it should. Let's take a much easier case of the life of the individual, because the individual life cycle maps onto parallels the life cycle of the species. Well, if we had the choice of any sort of information we could get about an individual in order to try to predict where they were going with their life, just a one-off case of prophecy, well, materialists would probably want to hook them up to state-of-the-art biometrics and run functional MRI scans and have continuous readouts of their liver enzymes and all that kind of stuff. And that would definitely be interesting information and could tell you some things, like if they had a major disease that might shorten their lives. But it doesn't tell you about what's going on inside of all that wetware. So if I had a single source of information to find out what is the deep code, the source code that this individual is running on, I would choose dreams. Because almost every day, this psyche is generating its own reality, right off the cuff. I mean, that is going to be a fantastically revealing artifact about who this person is. So dreams have an individual basis, but they also have a collective basis, and collective dreams are called myths. And so if we can analyze the person's dreams and figure out where their life is going, then we should also be able to analyze myths to figure out where the collective is going. And that is exactly what I try to do. Okay? Now, one thing about another reason why I think this is valid is, people say, oh, mythology, psychology, what really matters is economics and global strife and war and violence and all these things. Well, one thing, notice about what all those things have in common. Anything with money, anything with war, violence. It's all 100% a psychological product. Okay? So you can kind of keep staring at the movie projector screen at all these different news headlines flashing by, but if you really want to find out what's going on, you need to turn the inner eye back into the psyche, which is the source of all this. It's like Carl Jung said, there is no such thing in nature as a hydrogen bomb. That is man's doing. That is psyche's doing. Psyche is the great danger and also the great possibility. And so we need to get out of all the extroverted materialism out there and look back into the source of all these things that are happening and its deepest source code, which are revealed in myths. And I apologize for the notes. There's just so much to cover here that, So one of the things about our heading toward an evolutionary event horizon is people sometimes take a dark view. One of my close friends, Rob Reggie, wrote a wonderful book called Paranoia. It's the opposite of paranoia. And actually, most more good things are happening than bad. We probably have the lowest per capita death rate in thousands of years. But what we should expect as we approach the evolutionary event horizon is novelty will be heightened. Using novelty in the sense that Terence McKenna did, he got it from Alfred North Whitehead, and meaning that the creation of new forms and density of interconnectedness. So right now we have the most densely interconnected artifact ever created, the internet, and of course it was created by the most densely interconnected object we know of, the human brain. So we see that organic evolution and technological evolution parallel. I'm not a transhumanist technological singularity person. They, I think, are more materialists and underestimate the parallels that are going on in organic evolution. Okay. By the way, in terms of the Singularity Archetype, I just want to give a shout out to Michael Grosso, who's a philosopher in the 1880s. Came to almost the same conclusions. He called it the archetype of death and enlightenment. He also related to near-death experience, parapsychology, evolution, and so forth. And he's a philosophy professor, chairman of the philosophy department. So I'm not the only crazy one. Also, a lot of what Terence McKenna concluded, and these guys, I had already written my paper before these guys put out stuff down, or before I heard of them. But we all seem to be onto the same kind of set of ideas and what might be happening. And so relating it to the cargo cult, we can see a whole lot of our culture and a lot of the art out there as kind of the cargo cult of the Singularity Archetype. Some of it unconscious, like apocalypticism, and some of it conscious. Okay, so before we get into what the Singularity Archetype is, let's talk for a minute about what archetypes are. Most of you have probably heard of them, but just a little quick review and maybe a couple of points you haven't heard. Archetypes are primordial images. familiar with some of them, like the hero, the crone, the devouring mother, the anima figure, and so forth. But archetypes are patterns, but they are also agencies. They are like entities. They are subjects, not objects. They have an ability to run us. And when you meet people, usually they're often possessed by one or more archetypes. So archetypes can be said to have intentions, and they are like powerful, living things. And also, however, they are notoriously impossible to define definitively, because they're living things. And if you ask me, if I asked you to come up with, a 10-sentence definition of who you are, you realize it was a profound truncation of whoever you are, even if you work with those 10 sentences for the rest of your life. And so the archetype that can't be named is not the true archetype. So when we look at the Singularity Archetype, think of it this way. We're going to be looking at an image that's inside a round, brilliant diamond. And if you ever looked close up at a round, brilliant diamond, it's very intensely refracted and prismatic. So you go up to one facet of this giant diamond at a time and look at a distorted view of this image inside of it. It's like looking at a series of cubistic paintings. But if you start looking at it through every facet, eventually you start to coalesce what the whole will be like. And we're going to take a look at 3 examples of a Singularity Archetype so that you can at least try and triangulate on it and get an idea of what it is. But I might start with a slightly abstracted, this is as abstract as we're going to get here, abstracted definition of it, just so you have that logically to hold on to before we give examples of it. So generally when the Singularity Archetype manifests, it may manifest as an artist, a visionary, somebody having a near-death experience, somebody taking a psychotropic, a creative person probing into their own unconscious, and there'll be some kind of rupture of plane experience. A shock will occur, an ontological shock that may make the ego feel that its survival is threatened, and it may actually rupture the ego. And it will profoundly punctuate all forms of equilibrium. What will seem like a devastating apocalyptic thing in many cases will then be revealed to be a quantum evolutionary event. And so therefore to the self, it is experienced positively as something transformational and metamorphic. That metamorphosis will often be associated with spirals. You can see the DNA spiral around his eye. This is a symbol I've created for the Singularity Archetype. It will be associated with strange lights, with eyes, and with corporeal transcendence, the emergence of what we could call the glorified body. A Christian, but it's a body that has transcended the limits of corporeality. As you see happen, for example, when somebody merges with their avatar in the avatar. That would be an example of crossing such an event horizon. Another thing that happens is what I call homo-gestalt, a term I got from the science fiction writer, Theodore Sturgeon, and that's a telepathically networked species or group, and that will tend to have a visual telepathy. However, in this group telepathy, which I actually think is more the norm in nature, and that's why I think the ego served an invaluable role to encapsulate the psyche, to create the pearl of great Christ's individuality, but also created a lot of ego pathologies while doing that. That's a whole huge talk in itself. But when all that is ruptured, then a visual telepathy may begin, and people will and obviously, I lost my train. This is what happens when you look at notes and you can barely see them here. Well, this can occur during a dream. It often happens in dream times, visions, creative sessions. Sometimes Kundalini episodes can lead to this. And what happens is when people experience the Singularity Archetype, when you experience any archetype, it filters through your own personal unconscious. So you may give it some weird, peculiar, individual, idiosyncratic spins. And of course, religious traditions do that. They have visions of the Singularity Archetype, but looking at their visions, it can be like, when we look toward the future or we look at an archetype, we're always sort of looking through a glass darkly, and half of what we get back is some kind of distorted image of ourselves through a kind of warped mirror. But when you look at it through a religious tradition or an indigenous tradition even, it's kind of like looking through a stained glass window where your vision is segmented by lead solder, and the colors are where they created, hundreds of years ago out of cobalt and iron oxide and this kind of thing. I rather look through the Jungian technique, which is that we don't believe any version of it is authoritative. It's not. But we look at as many as possible, start pulling out things that are idiosyncratic to single versions, and we start to sort of improve the signal-to-noise ratio by doing that. Okay, so let's actually take a look at the Singularity Archetype as it shows up. I'll start with a very, very simple dream. This is somebody at another festival, Rainbow Gathering, a young man told me a few years ago. He said he was standing out in the forest in his dream, and it felt like the earth was being shaken to pieces. It felt like the end of the world. The sky got completely dark, and he felt like he might die at any moment. And then suddenly there's like a break in the dark canopy of skies. A beam of sunlight comes through, and then spiraling out of that beam of light is an eagle, and the eagle has in its talons a glowing golden egg, and it deposits the egg on top of a tree. Probably the shortest version of the Singularity Archetype I can think of, but you have it all there. You have what to the ego seems dark and apocalyptic. There's a rupture of plane experience. You have the eagle, which has the best eyes in nature, coming down a beam of light in a spiral. And the spiral is another symbol, is an evolutionary symbol. And it deposits an egg on the top of a tree. A tree is a symbol of development, the egg of that unformed potential of the species. And now we'll take a look at two more dreams that were recorded by one of Jung's most brilliant colleagues, Marie-Louise von Franz. And these occurred, and it's important to note this because you want to see that these come from very contrasting kinds of people. The first was kind of a young hippie guy. The second is what was described as a simple Protestant woman by Marie-Louise von Franz, probably a member of the Swiss agrarian class. And in her first dream, she is terrified. She's standing in the Middle East. In the Middle East, she draws pyramids nearby. It's supposed to be Jerusalem, though, but that's kind of her naive understanding of the Middle East, is that pyramids will be visible everywhere. And the dark wing of Satan is coming down and blotting out the sun. And that seems like an absolutely apocalyptic, terrifying thing. In the second dream, her vantage shifts. She's no longer standing on the ground. She's now up in the heavens, and what looked like the dark cloak of Satan is revealed to be the white wafting cloak of God. Jesus is painted sort of reaching his hand out as if inviting man towards something, the viewer towards something, and she draws a white spiral of light in the sky that's oriented this way, and as von Franz says, seems to be inviting us into another dimension. So what seemed apocalyptic is revealed as this transcendent evolutionary event, and it's associated with a spiral. Okay, now the third example, the last example I'll give, is much more complicated, but also might be more interesting. And it comes from a completely different psyche, an astrophysicist and a famous atheist, Arthur C. Clarke, the visionary science fiction writer, in his novel Childhood's End. Well, what happens in the novel Childhood's End? Because Childhood's End was one of those numinous things that when I read it, I kind of was freaked out as a child, because I was like, how could these ideas that I thought were peculiar to my own fantasies show up in a novel written 4 years before I was born? Of course, I didn't understand about the collective unconscious at the time. Anyway, so in Childhood's End, UFOs appear all around the Earth. They announce, you can call us the overlords. We're here to help you with your evolution and to be your allies. And they don't interfere too much. However, they make all warfare and mass-scale violence impossible. Such as technological magic, anything from a nuclear missile, an artillery shell, even a bullet, is somehow returned to sender. So all violence stops, pretty much. And they share with us all kinds of technological and scientific knowledge, which kind of puts our science to sleep, because now, why bother? They're getting much more advanced stuff, skipping a million steps. And there is a time of unprecedented peace and prosperity. However, one oddity about the appearance of the overlords is that they will not appear physically, before mankind. And yeah, if anybody has some. So they, thank you so much. Thanks. Thank you. All right. They won't appear for 2 generations, and people speculate, wow, they must look like, hideous insects or slime or whatever. When they do appear, after 2 generations, 50 years, they step off their craft and they have giants, their bodies are giant size, and they have huge ebony wings, and they have horns and giant tails, and yellow eyes with cat slits. And they look like what demons look like from our primordial imagination. And yet, they actually are totally benign. And Arthur C. Clarke, even though he's kind of an atheist materialist, describes it as a race memory of the future event. It sounds a lot like the archetypes of the collective unconscious. And basically, their appearance, which was just a physiological adaptation to the conditions of the planet they came from, is associated primordially in human beings with evil because their coming represents the end of the old species. Okay, so it's a total threat to the ego and to the present equilibrium, even though in fact they are here to help us through an evolutionary process. They have been sent by what Arthur C. Clarke calls the overmind, which is kind of his naturalistic God concept. It's a vast universe-wide intelligence. It's aware of where intelligence is about to undergo this kind of quantum evolutionary jump anywhere in the world. And it sends the overlords, who themselves are far more advanced than we are, but not able to make this jump, to act as midwives. Well, anyway, one of the overlords, what the overlords are looking for is what they call subject zero. That will be the first infant born that will be of the new type. And one of the overlords goes to the home of a man, and it sounds like the description of this man's home sounds like a prophetic anticipation of New Agers, because the people there are a little bit goofy and a little bit too prejudiced. And when he reads through the library of books, he realizes that, wow, so much of this is kind of nonsensical. But he's very interested in finding out anything happening paranormal, because that can be an indication of this new evolution. And then he observes them doing a kind of seance as one of the sort of New Age entertainments, and somebody asks the Ouija board, who are you? And it spells out I-A-M-A-L-L, I am all. Sounds like the collective unconscious. And the overlord realizes subject zero must be present. But all the adults there are kind of mediocre, but it turns out one of the women is pregnant. And she gives birth to subject zero. And soon after he's born, you have art cars going by, just in case anybody wonders where the music's coming from. Soon after he's born, he immediately exhibits profound paranormal abilities, and all the children born after him, he's like a sea crystal, are of this new type. And then after a certain critical number of them are born, all the human beings of the old type, us in other words, become sterile. Hence the title, childhood to end. And this is why it's threatening to the whole, the old genome, because the old genome is over. It has been like a chrysalis, and it's giving birth to the new form. And then the children, at a certain point in their evolution, translocate and all join together in one continent, and they call it the long dance. They, I think, at different times spiral together or join hands. And it's the last human being of the old type left alive, when they are going to cross the event horizon and join with the overmind. It looks like an aurora borealis in the sky, like a spiral of light in the sky. So notice, like the dreams we just saw from the simple Protestant woman, Arthur C. Clarke's imagination comes up with the dark wing of Satan and the spiral of light in the sky as they chase to cross the event horizon. And if anybody feels up to it, would anybody mind telling that art card? Please move on. If anybody feels to that. Somebody who's sure. Thank you. Now we're going to get into some of the more specifics of how things may change as we approach the event horizon of the Singularity Archetype. And then we'll talk about how it relates to that. So definitely hang on for that. So, one aspect of it that is weird is we don't have, this is not something that's completely an extrapolation into the future. And by the way, this is not like a specific prediction with a time date. It's saying exactly what's going to happen. It's giving us a general pattern, just like an acorn has the general pattern of a tree in it, of we really understood acorns, we would be able to predict a lot about what kind of tree would occur. And if we understand the singularity archetype, it gives shape to the future. But there's plenty of unformedness, there's many ways these things can play out. But one of the commonalities that we find in so many different versions, and there's underway right now, is a more visual means of communication and consciousness. And this is underway, we're experiencing this right now because of all the visual technologies that are massively rewiring our brains. I mean, not too long ago, when my dad was born, it was the silent movie era. And he was born in New York City, hardly a backward, they didn't have radio stations. When the first silent movies came out, and it was a picture image of a train pulling into the station, people dove for their seats. They couldn't even comprehend that this was just a representational image. When they had their first zoom lens, because they started out with just fixed focal length lenses, and they zoomed in on a woman's face, people were gasping. Her head is going to explode, it's getting bigger. They couldn't understand it. Meanwhile, I just watched like a Marvel Comics movie with like a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, and just in the opening credits, there were all these montages and surreal dissolves and so forth. They understood it completely. So this is what's happening, is a profound shift for the visual, but still stranger things may happen with the visual, with technology, and also with some organic changes. And one of the things that makes this more visual aspect so important is that it's also profoundly changing the role of women. I'll leave that as a little bit of a cliffhanger, but to see the importance of the visual, there was something that happened 544 million years ago called the Cambrian explosion. In 544 million years ago, there were only 3 phyla of life, but then between 544 million years ago and 538 million years ago, there was this explosion of novelty and of new forms of life. In fact, by 538 million years ago, we then had 38 phyla, the same number that we have today. Now, what happened during that time? Well, there's something called the light switch theory that a guy named Andrew Parker came up with. He wrote a book. I don't know the name of the book here, but a blink of the eye, I think. And he talks about this theory that what really happened during that period is eyes were developed. Well, as soon as you have eyes, now you can start to have a whole lot of new kind of predators. And now the prey have eyes, so they have to devise all these strategies. They might have to camouflage themselves. All this, once you have eyes, everything changes. It's a huge growth of consciousness. Now an organism can assemble some kind of simulacrum of the outside world in some kind of a mind. And that creates a profound explosion. So the eye is really the symbol of evolution in a lot of ways. And so what's happening right now is a profound shift of hemispheric dominance. And again, you don't have to look to the future. And by the way, everything that the singularity archetype sort of predicts with a near-death experience, it's a phenomenological actuality. So again, this isn't all in the future. The singularity archetype is happening now. It can be a phenomenological actuality in your ethnogen experience. People will take ayahuasca, the early anthropologists call it telepathy, because they would have a consensual, visual, telepathic experience. And the ayahuasquero songs would seem to create a moving symphony of shapes and colors and so forth, and people would be able to comment on what they had all experienced together. So the singularity archetype already occurs, but it occurs episodically. It has not yet occurred as a species-wide event. But when people have near-death experiences, and this is the age of the near-death experience for many reasons, and then first because we've started to study it, but also because resuscitation technology has been exploding. Even just in the last 5 or 10 years, I don't know if you know this, but they can now revive some people that have been dead for hours. The boundary of death is becoming very blurred. And because we can bring people back, we can bring back these really profound reports. And that kind of trumps neurological materialism. Because people, if I talk about the Pamela Reynolds case, people having exotic surgical procedures where they're not only is their brain dead, but they have no electrical activity in frontal lobes. down here, she was having a rare surgical procedure called standstill, which is hooked up to a heart-lung machine and flatlining her. The heart-lung machine is pumping plasma through her body. Her body's been refrigerated. She has earbuds in her ears producing 110 decibel clicking sounds. It's called the evoked potential test to see if they can get anything off her brainstem. They couldn't. You know, state-of-the-art instrumentation. 38 people working on her. Her eyes are taped shut, and yet she's able to come back from that and general anesthesia and everything else that would stop her brain. The brain had absolutely no measurable activity whatsoever. She was able to report all kinds of very specific things that were said during the surgery. Exotic pieces of equipment like the Midas Rex bone saw looked like. It didn't look anything like a saw, and so forth, and as well as having a profound spiritually changing experience. It's hard to explain that. It's actually impossible with neurological materialists. And but materialists often have a great investment in that. So, anyway, now that we are shifting to the right hemisphere through visual technologies, it's changing the end of the patriarchal age. A very influential book for me was Leonard Swain's The Alphabet versus the Gods. What Leonard Swain was interested in, it was something that Terence McKenna was interested in as well, and that all of us should be interested in, is there was some kind of a change that happened some 6,000 odd years ago, where we went from what Rihanna Eisler, who wrote a seminal book of the Chalice and the Blade called Partnership Societies, to dominator societies. The iconic object went from the chalice, symbol of fertility, fecundity, and food and abundance, to the sword. And this shift, spread across the planet like a plague, and transformed everything. And Terence McKenna thought it was when the arboreal plains in Africa dried up and we lost our connection to psilocybin mushrooms. It's called the snow and the egg theory. But another theory is that what happened when societies, the trigger event, according to Leonard Swain, I think he presents pretty convincing evidence, was the adoption of written alphabets. Well, I was an English teacher for 14 years. I'm not against written alphabets, but they caused a profound shift toward the left hemisphere, the hemisphere of hierarchy and linearity and so forth. And then we became extremely left hemisphere dominant. And when we did, women, as soon as societies, or shortly after societies adopt written alphabets, women can no longer participate in religious rituals. And they start to become second-class citizens and then property of husbands or owners. Clerics will start to wear black and white, the colors of pen and paper. A document will become the ruling object. In the beginning was the word, and the document could be religious, it could be the Hammurabi Code, it could be the rule of law, the DSM-5, Mao's Red Book. But it always seems to be that we're ruled by a document of some sort. That's the age we still live in. But now, and also, just to show you how profound this is, do you know what the second of the Ten Commandments is? Okay, it's popularly interpreted as against, well, I'm going to need a flashlight. Maybe you have a light handy. The second of the Ten Commandments is about not having images. Okay, some people guess that it's thou shalt not kill. Well, that's the sixth. So the second is about you shall not have images. Now that's kind of popularly interpreted as against idol worship, but when you read directly in the Torah, you read this exactly word for word. Second of the Ten Commandments.
Give me your light. Give me your light.
Okay.
Give me your light.
Okay, thank you very much.
Want a headlamp?
I think it's okay. Just jumping yourself in the out here. Okay. Thank you very much. This is a great thing about the gift economy is people do help out here. We have cooperation. It's almost like yourself. Think of something and somebody provides it to you sometimes without even saying. Okay? From Exodus 24, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or that is in the water under the earth. And if that isn't clear enough, we go on to the Torah, which says, in Deuteronomy 4:15-18. Take ye therefore good heed unto yourselves, lest ye corrupt yourselves, and make you a graven image, the similitude of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any beast that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged fowl that flieth in the air, the likeness of anything that creepeth on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the waters beneath the earth. And so some people will try and say, well, that was just about idol worship. And you know, what's interesting is, but it really says, don't make images. And they're dead serious about it. That the word idol comes from the Latin word idolum, and idolum derives from the Greek idola, the I-D-O-L-O-N, which is the Greek word for image. And what was Yahweh's first commandment to Adam? It was to name things. I put you in charge, male. And now it's your job to name things, to put words over everything. So then began the era of being profoundly anti-image. And all the Abrahamic faiths would go through an intensely anti-image phase. Okay, for example, in the 8th century, there was the most people whose heads would explode if they ever came to burn them, the iconoclasts. Well, the iconoclasts, icon means image basically, were an 8th century Christian cult that were anti-image. They went around destroying paintings and busting up, priceless statues from classical antiquity because they were so profoundly anti-image. So the more recently minted in Abrahamic faith, the more recent will be the anti-image phase. Also, the more recently those people came to literature. So the most recent Abrahamic faith, Islam, is the most anti-image and the most contemporarily anti-image. And that's why they made all those beautiful Byzantine patterns and stuff, because they couldn't have images, and God forbid somebody in Sweden makes a cartoon of their prophet and they'll start killing people thousands of miles away. Okay? But what's the most oppressively anti-image aspect about Islam is, and we can argue about whether this is Orthodox Islam or tribal Islam or whatever, that's being afterward if you want to, is the burqa, which is both anti-woman and anti-image. Because to keep somebody from having their face revealed is like a huge castration. Because we are face creatures. Okay, no other animal has a face like we do. We have like 135 muscles, I think, in our faces. We are constantly performing a visual language with our facial expressions, nanosecond by nanosecond. And this is profoundly revealing. It tells us everything. You know, when an infant, you can put any kind of a sparkly object in front of an infant, but even when it can't focus its eyes yet, when a human face draws near, the brain lights up. That's how important the face is. So to erase a woman's face and for it to be a woman is the ultimate expression of the patriarchal era, and it's anti-image, anti-female, anti-right hemisphere aspects. Okay, thank you. So the NDE, let's see here. And by the way, a contemporary of Christ, Philo Judaeus, who was an Alexandrian Jewish philosopher. Oh wow, thank you. Now we really got light. He's a contemporary of Christ, and what he said is that we would really have sort of reached the event horizon, the omega points, the most profound change, when the logos, the communication of God, was beheld instead of heard. And that's why I call that chapter Logos Beheld, and thanks to my colleague, Lane Terrence McKenna, for pointing that out. Okay? So we are entering into an age of shape-shifting to realize images. Okay? What's out there? What was the iconic object of the industrial age? Not that long ago, the iron locomotive. Talk about a single-purpose object, trying to repurpose a locomotive. It runs on a linear track. It's like a electrical device. Totally Newtonian physics. But what is the iconic object of the current age? You probably have it in your pocket. It's a pixelated screen. It's a total shapeshifter. It is an idioplastic artifact. In other words, it changes shape based on your ideas of what's going on here, like in a dream time. Whatever I'm obsessed with, good or bad, if I'm obsessed with Japanese schoolgirls and Eskimo poses, I can just type into Google and immediately whole websites and images of that are are going across this pixelated screen. And so conventionally, we think of telepathy as I hear what you say, but that's really not better than making these little mouth noises we make right now, which is the awkward way we communicate right now, or calling somebody over the phone. Of course, it'd be an invasion of privacy. What would be a more profound version of telepathy would be, instead of telling you about my dream, I'll be like, well, here, step into it. This occurs spontaneously in the rare but documented cases of mutual dreaming, wildly exaggerated maybe inception. Okay? And you know, when something can occur once, William James has a principle, all that's necessary to disprove the notion that all crows are black is one white crow. Okay? So if anything can happen once, think about this with anything related to the paranormal. If one mother revoked from sensory information, knew specifically how her kid was in trouble, well, that blows open some kind of remote viewing for all time. Because if anything can happen once, then it's allowed for in the structure of reality and it will happen again. But if you take all of those paranormal things that have ever happened, they would just define the outer edges of the current human performance envelope. But if all these things started to emerge collectively, we might have incredible emergent effects that we can't even conceive of. It would be like what JDS Aldane said, paraphrasing a little bit, reality is not only stranger than we think, it's stranger than we can think. And that's stuff we have to have for the evolutionary event horizon. Okay? So near-death experiences have many of these features. And so this is the event horizon that we are all guaranteed, and I'm quite excited about it, not without some of the messy stuff that could lead up to it, like aging and illness and so forth. But death itself to me is a very exciting possibility. I see it as a portal shimmering up ahead. And so I don't really have to get too worried about what's going on in the whole soul shadow, tragic magic, blood-soaked carnival of history, because I'm guaranteed we all are an escape hatch, and it isn't that far away. A little further, hopefully, for most of you who are quite a bit younger, but we all have absolutely guaranteed. And we also have more information about what happens when we step out of that magic portal than we've ever had before. The explosion of information in the last couple of decades is just profound. And basically what happens when people have classic near-death experiences is they go through the Singularity Archetype. And by the way, it's important you research it, because they've discovered that not only do near-death experiences profoundly change people, and the effects only increase with time, which makes it seem like it is an archetype, a living agency, not just like a traumatic experience, but it can actually increase its power. But also they found Dr. Kenneth Lynn, Professor Emeritus in Psychology at the University of Connecticut, has done some great research. Just researching and reading about and hearing about near-death experiences produces many of the same effects as a near-death experience, because we can kind of recognize it from within, and maybe even have some submerged memory of having gone through something like that. But here's an example of a way that in carefully controlled studies, so the best work on near-death experience, Tim Van Lommel, he wrote a book called Consciousness Beyond Life. If you think this is kind of a flaky subject, he's a Dutch cardiologist. His work had superb methodology, and he was published in the journal Lancet, the prestigious mainstream medical journal. Okay? One of his findings was that he had as a control group people at the Dutch hospitals who had cardiac arrest and no NDE. Well, 8 years out after the experience, some had NDEs, some just had cardiac arrest and no NDE. The people who had just the cardiac arrest and no NDE, their church attendance went up by 25%. Maybe they're starting to be worried about that. Because usually after near-death experiences, that's the last thing you'll ever worry about again. Because what you worry about is, how do I get back to that? Because what people describe after near-death experience, they almost never want to come back. The other one had in 1948, he was depressed for 6 months. One woman described it as putting dirty underwear back on. Once you've been released from the mortal corporeal version 1.0 body into a glorified body, this far greater, aliveness and consciousness, it really sucks to be funneled back into a body that probably had some problems, which is why I was having a near-death experience. By the way, near-death experiences don't always happen to people in medical jeopardy. There's the expected death experience. If you're in a plane that looks like it's going to crash, you may have a comprehensive near-death experience with a life review, and then the plane may suddenly pull out, So you're never actually under any medical jeopardy, but you accepted that you're going to die. There's also the shared death experience, where people standing around somebody who's dying may share the whole near-death experience with them, including their life with you. And they don't have an oxygen-starved brain, and so forth. So, another thing that happens when people have near-death experiences is they have profound vision. They have a telepathic awareness, and often like a being of light that communicates them telepathically. But then you also find that they have people who have very poor eyesight in their regular bodies. They find that they have sparkling, super high res, 360-degree vision, or spherical vision, where they can count the number of dust particles on the top of the lights in the surgical amphitheater, but also look at the cracks in the tiles under the surgeon's shoes. Then they'll have the autoscopic experience, where they're a point of view outside of their body, looking down on it, and then they realize that their autoscopic point of view, this eyeball floating in space, that they can go anywhere, just like you discover in dreams, that you can transcend gravity, and you can fly, and so forth. And they may report objects on the tops of the roofs of the hospital, and then later that those objects will be found, and so forth. So, we've got 5 minutes left. Let me see what absolutely must be said here. An example of what goes on with the glorified body, and it relates to near-death experience too, that in popular culture is the movie Avatar. Okay, I don't remember what happens in the opening scene of Avatar, but you have a paraplegic marine named Jake. But he's in his dream body. He's flying. Okay? He's having an out-of-body experience. He's flying in his dream body, a glorified body. But then he has to wake up and come back to his paraplegic body. And it's one of these situations, we all have some discomfort with corporate reality. And I feel there is a great unspoken of, for the most part, will in the human species. I call the will towards the glorified body. I think it's the deepest cause, even despite all the patriarchal things, of things like eating disorders, body image struggles. People who once, in Birmingham, you never see more extreme people who want to transform the version 1.0 mortal corporeal body than at Birmingham. The most tattooed, the most fierce, the most costumed people you're ever going to meet, with lights coming out of them and so forth. We desperately want to break out of the one body, one psyche rule, which would not be true, say, with digital artifacts in the virtual world. So we have this very unhappy mortal corporeal situation. A young man in the prime of life with all that testosterone. He was a warrior, he was a soldier, he was an athlete, and now he's got a paraplegic body. And at very numerous moments in that movie, we can all feel for his excitement is when he brought up that tank and he sees this magnificent avatar that he can step out finally and violate that one body, one psyche rule. Think about how many people here might be unhappy with their assigned gender or with aging or how they look, And imagine if I were to tell you, well, instead of being able to go to Burning Man dressed any way you want, actually you have to wear a pale uniform for the rest of your life. And in fact, it'll gradually wear out, and when it completely wears out, you're dead. That's basically our situation. We would never want to be like in Mao's China where we had to wear the same pajamas. We want to be able to not just wear one kind of costume, but wear one for the lover, another one to face an adversary, another one to go to a business meeting. So of course we would also want to have the bodies that would suit different occasions, different sexual impulses maybe. And so in Avatar, that's what happens. But he has to die first. He goes into a sarcophagus, coffin-like technological device, and his waking consciousness disappears, like in dreaming or in death, and now he passes through a tunnel of light, and now he's in his avatar. Where does the word avatar come from? It comes from Indian mythology. It's a spirit being descended into the flesh. And so that is what we are. We are like spirit beings descended into the flesh, and we have an event horizon we are all to cross. And when it pathologizes, it becomes the fear of death, and that often takes the form of apocalypticism. Because if you're in your ego, you fear death, especially because your ego is so bound up in the social matrix. what, I'm going to die and other people are still going to be alive and nobody has to talk about me and I won't even be here and I'll have my stuff. But if everybody dies at once, that's much more satisfying to the ego. And if the kind of people I like to hang with are raptured off, New Age or religious somewhere, and the people I don't like are left behind to deal with the Antichrist or to get crushed by the New World Order or something like that, it's an all-satisfying scenario. So the fear of death, because people confuse inner and outer, gets projected out and becomes, wow, this should all end. Okay? And there was a woman named Elizabeth Steam who started predicting in the 1960s there was going to be this massive earthquake that was going to basically knock California into the ocean. And then all these other psychics, I think it was August 14th, 1969, all these other psychics started predicting the same date in a copycat fashion. And it was talked about even in the New York Times. It was taken so seriously. It was bigger than the Mayan in 2012. That's another bad subject. When that day came, unfortunately, Elizabeth Steam was not there. She died of some rare medical symptoms shortly before her prophecy did not come true. So when we confuse inner and outer, we project, we make our whole culture into a cargo cult. What I recommend instead is to take it as a symbol of transformation and metamorphosis. Embrace your visual imagination. Embrace unusual experience. Embrace a more visual mode of life, like you're all doing here, being in Burning Man. Embrace the power of your imagination to manifest new forms, and embrace the metamorphic power of this Singularity Archetype. And thank you, I'm Jonathan Zapp, and my website is zapporacle.com. I have some cards up here. I've also got iPhone and Android app version of the site. I've got my book. And I guess that's about all of it all. But right now I do free dream interpretation. If you find me walking on the plot, a free dream interpretation sign, hit me up for some free dream interpretation.
What's the website?
Website is zapporacle.com, and I'll be glad to give you a card. CAD is my last name, and then just the word Oracle. And or you can just Google it, Zap Oracle. And then come right up. And if anybody wants to talk after, I'll hang around and go from there. And like if we have time for any questions, we start a few minutes after. Anybody have a quick question?
We have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Okay. Question, anybody? It's called Looking Toward the Event Horizon, the Singularity Archetype, and Human Metamorphosis. You can get it on Amazon, Kindle, all those two things. Yes, sir.
Why are images such a big deal? Like, you make such a big deal about images?
Well, images are at the core that I would be repeating too much in my talk right now. But images are what light up the right hemisphere. Images are a faster flow rate of information. If you think about how many bytes it uses up to make an audio recording of me giving this talk versus a video, you just communicate massively greater amounts of information. So it's just the evolutionary trend as it was as it came to exposure. Anything else? Yes, sir. Could you come closer? I can read. Sorry?
Why do you see images have the power to take control to dominate people's lives?
What do I see power dominating people's lives?
Look, you basically mentioned that images signals, right? Basically have these abilities to dominate, right? Basically influence people's lives, whether it's for the better or for the bad. Why, like you personally wrote a case because of what you said, actually the image signals that ability to maybe something influence.
Well, images, unlike words, and again, there's a dark side. So logos and held can be used to totally manipulate. An example of one of the most potent black magics that does that is advertising. Okay? You show me a hottie of the particular kind I happen to like, and they're playing volleyball on the beach, and they look fantastic, and they have the perfect hot tan and flowing blonde hair, and they smoke menthol cigarettes. There's a part of my monkey mind that's like, wow, there's something kind of cool about menthol cigarettes. You know? I have this all the time. I'll see like some attractive person and they're eating a particular food, and I'll think there's something magical about that food. So all of these things, again, when the metabolism of the species is heating up, and as the novelty intensifies, it means the outer edge of light and the outer edge of dark both intensify. Okay? Okay, that's what makes it so interesting. Okay, so we will see new forms of goodness and new forms of weird darkness too. It's like Sophocles said, no great gift enters the human sphere without a price attached. So unlike Terence McKenna and Ron Doss, who I've talked about with the subject, they see it as all benign. I think that there will also be novel forms of evil and darkness. And so that's something we all need to be careful about. We kind of need darkness to have a developmental system. Yes, sir. Can you keep it a little close because I had trouble hearing the last time?
Okay, the last question. The question is we talked about policy. What we heard from other sources is that the future is difficult to predict because the collective consciousness can move it, so it's probabilistic. So my question is, what can we do to move into the positive, to align the positive future as to avoid the negative stuff which is going on?
Okay, so the question is basically how to move the future toward the more positive side, given how prophecy is and how probabilistic it is. And the answer is, it's the same answer. By the way, I also have on my website an article with 662 cards. It's totally free, and we're working for over 30 years. Free membership saves all your readings forever. And one of the things I mentioned throughout the oracle, because it does sometimes confront you with the dark side, is do that which you remember well in your deathbed. So if you are living right now with the event horizon in mind, which for all of us, the guaranteed one, we may or may not make it to the eschaton, is death. If you are living your most fully engaged life right now, then you are helping with your whole being move it in that positive direction. But other things include, things that enhance visual technology, learning, stimulating people's visual imagination, creating a 3D space out there in the high desert where people can walk into your dream. That is logos to be held, and we will all be participating in right here, right now.
Camera only had 20 minutes of video time. Fast forward.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, everyone. Thanks again for being here for the Fractal Planet Speaker series.
Have a book I can buy right now.
And we're going to also have a special musical guest fairly soon, I believe. And at 9:15, we're going to start the talks again.
Amazon, Nook,
The next talk is at 9:15. It's going to be called The Science of Genetics, Informational Life Systems. And then after that, we're going to have Myths and Metaphysics.
Interpret my dream that I had.
Religion. And then after that, at 10:15, we're going to do How to Start Your Own Religion. And at 11:15, we're going to have Cutting Edge Art.
I've got a dream.
Okay, I'll be outside.
Okay.
That's a character. That's enough.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, man. Where do you live, Jonathan?
I live in Boulder.
The power of the simple stuff. No, it's live. So,
Why don't we do it?
Definitely, I'll be glad to talk to you about it outside. I want to talk about the next speaker. Sorry. Thank you very much. You're welcome. I really appreciate that.
What happened to my guidelines?
Did you do something?
I have to.